Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. In this podcast, we look at topics such as near-death experiences, after-death communication, deathbed moments, and all kinds of spiritually transformative experiences. I also love to hear your first-hand accounts, so feel free to reach out via www.letstalkneardeath.com.
Things that are commonly put under the term deathbed phenomena. Things where people are seeing people that have already died and are reaching out to them and talking to them and saying, oh, so-and-so's here, and everyone else is looking around going, they can't see anybody, and this person's been dead some time. But the reality actually is that death is a 10 out of 10 stat. We're all going there. And what if we could embrace it as one of the chapters of a full life?
Kia ora, hello, and welcome along to another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I am very, very excited for the episode that we have today, for our guest who's joining us with so much wisdom and knowledge and many, many experiences under her belt. Our guest today is Helen Callanan, and Helen has had a massive impact on my life quite recently. If you've been following the podcast recently, you'll understand that I had this drawing to go and to work with people who were at end of life, who were dying, were looking for some support, either themselves or the family members, in the transition from this lifetime. Helen is the managing director and the lead educator at Preparing the Way. And Preparing the Way is all about training up end of life doulas, about supporting those who are dying, and raising awareness and education in this very, very important field. So Helen's trained in traditional Chinese medicine. She's a Reiki master, and she has more than 30 years experience working with the very ill and the dying. The death experiences of her own parents, her family, friends, and many clients, and her passion for education that transforms has led her to establish Preparing the Way. She's bringing her wealth of knowledge to hundreds of doulas, clients, families, and those close to them. So Helen, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. It's just great to have you here. I've learnt so much already. I'm excited to get into some of the conversation about maybe the parts that I haven't known and some of the more personal stories. Can we start with, I guess, how did you get into doing this work? How did you get to having more than 30 years experience working with the dying?
Kirsty, firstly, thanks for having me, and kia ora to all of your wonderful listeners. And I'm sure some Aussies are going to listen to this too. So
I hope so.
We want to acknowledge them as well. So thanks for having me. Yes, I have been doing this a long time, and it is my deep passion and love. And my other deep passion and love in my life has been Reiki. And it was sort of through Reiki that I actually got into it. As you mentioned, I did a degree in Chinese medicine, and I became a bit of a seminar junkie. This is back in the 80s, like 65,000 years ago, it feels like. So I did became a bit of a seminar junkie. I did a heap of different workshops and learning and growing and expanding, and started studying meditation, and, was really interested in other layers of consciousness and thought and the deep Eastern traditions and these ancient traditions that have been talking about end of life and life and healing for years. So I started to study those more. And back in 1985, I met Reiki, and it was actually Reiki, sort of, if you like, vicariously, that led me into my work with the very ill, terminally ill and dying. And I was a professional Reiki channel, and I was doing, 40, 50 hours of Reiki a week.
Oh, wow.
And I started to be alongside. Now, I'd never heard the word doula, didn't even exist for me. And maybe for your listeners who don't know, it's a Greek word, D-O-U-L-A, which means to be in service to. So there's birth doulas, they may have heard of those, and there's end of life doulas, another we call transitional as well. Anyway, so fast forward now to where I'm doing Reiki. So I started to do what I now call the work of a doula with people that I started. What Reiki was what got me in the door. So I would be there vigiling with them at their bedside in hospital as they were dying and as they died and then after their death, and then helping their family. Perhaps they wanted to take their person home to die. So I helped organise the hospital bed and helped them do that. I was there supporting families in their grief and loss. I became a liaison sometimes between the nursing staff and the family, helping explain, things that were happening. And to all of that now, I know as the work of a doula, helping people plan things and arrange resources. And I was doing Reiki often all the while. And so I started to do the work of a doula organically. And in reality, I see that as being, we call it the distinction of the word response able. We say we're responsible. If you break that word down, it's to be response able, to have the ability to respond. And to me, that's where doula lives. And that's also where work with the dying lives. It's about being in the moment, being present to what is occurring and responding to that, right? Sometimes response has activity associated with it. Well, it might be arranging something or having a conversation or some other activity. Sometimes responding or being response able looks like being silent and still and just being with. So responsibility or being a doula has many, many faces. Being with people who are dying has many faces and many looks. And, for me, I'm, as you know, I'm really always excited about any opportunity, to talk about this. And because, I think one of the great, difficulties we've created in our world, and I have to say, I love that I get to teach in New Zealand and learn more. And I'm a baby novice about anything, even in the deep Maori culture, but how well they do death. And by often having the person going home to the marae and having the days of celebration and acknowledgement and care for the body and people being there and held in that space, that's that after death care is just so powerful. And I teach that, in our culture here in Australia, I think we haven't handled it particularly well. We've created a lot of fear around death, and and this is, I think, not only in Australia, it's often around the world. Death has become quite a medical experience, and it just isn't, right? Yeah, it just isn't. It's a deeply personal, individual, family, community event. And so to me, the privilege of being with people at that time is there's nothing better.
It's quite an honor, isn't it, to be with people
100%.
who are going through this transition, and the conversations are so rich and every moment is so meaningful, isn't it? So yeah, I love that. I'm really fascinated that your work, the amazing work you're doing, has come out of looking into consciousness and looking into who we are as spiritual beings, looking into meditation and all of these beautiful things. What has your work led you to believe about these things? What sort of experiences have you had with people right at these final moments?
Yeah, look, there's many things that I've experienced that are difficult to explain in our usual vernacular and in our Western world. Things that are commonly linked, put under the term deathbed phenomena. Things where people are seeing people that have already died and are reaching out to them and talking to them and saying, "Oh, so and so's here," and everyone else is looking around going, "They can't see anybody," and this person's been dead some time. What I call that place being in between the worlds. Where they've sort of got one foot here in third dimension, if you like, and one foot's, out in some other, or one aspect is out in some other place, and they can move between them. And, you know, that to me, the more we can support that process and encourage that process, it's not a time to say, Mum, Dad died years ago. He's not in the room, Mum. It's not a time to do that, right? It's a time, really? You can say, that's fabulous. Do they have a message for you? You know, it's time to encourage and validate there. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not true, right? And different traditions have different practices. And, you know, I've seen people, another situation I think of is where the person who was at the end of their life had a long and deep attached relationship to their partner, of course, right? Naturally, understandably. And the partner was so there, present in the tending to the needs, and was just the most tender, beautiful experience to watch this. And I was just like, I'm clear. I just need to step right back and be in the background, because there's something beautiful happening over here. But the person who was at the end of their life was so close to leaving, to making that transition, but it was like they kept coming back. They kept coming back. And I remember something I read in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying. And each time their partner would cry, they would come back. They'd start to leave and they'd come back. And when the partner would cry and grieve. And I remember reading in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, and I'm going to badly paraphrase it, but it was really about saying that to a person who's dying, they're in like a super state of heightened consciousness. So our mundane third dimensional beingness and the sound of grief and crying and tears are like the noise of 100,000 thunderstorms. But the sound of love and gratitude and things are like fuel for their journey. So I asked the partner if I could speak to them, and I took them outside the room, and I said, you know, look, I know this is just the biggest thing ever, and I know how much you love your partner. I want to share with you something that I learned and see whether it lands with you. Is that okay? Always asking permission. The partner was like, yes, of course. And I explained this. I said, you know, the Rinpoche said that, you know, that this happened, and what do you think? And they went, oh, well, yeah. And I said, you know what, maybe we've got a lifetime to grieve. But what about for this important moment for them, that we're able to empower, you know, their leaving? And this was a couple who were very, I would call them awake, you know, and conscious. You know, I wouldn't say that to everybody, because that may be quite difficult for someone to even process, right? So anyway, she went back and she was like, oh my God, yes. So she went and she just loved on her partner and you know, shared memories and smiling and talking and tears running down her face all the while. But just and the partner was just like gone so quickly.
Oh,
you
wow.
know? So how we're being with our person at the end of their life can make a difference. You know, I've seen people wait like ridiculous amounts of time for people to arrive, and the doctor's like, we don't even know how they're alive right now, you know, but they'll wait. And the minute that person comes in the room or very soon after, you know, they'll leave. I know of a great story of a family where a gentleman, the family came, he'd been, you know, in the active dying stage for a couple of days, as is quite common. But he was getting, you know, his energy was getting lower and lower and breath softer and softer and further, but like very close. His family were there all day. The grandkids were up on their bed, up on his bed, crawling all over Grandpa. You know, big family there. They all left about 7:30. Just the wife and the daughter left. They stayed till about 10:30. Then they decided to leave, and he died at 10:35.
Oh, wow.
So you know, sometimes I think people wait to die when their people have left.
Yeah.
And that could be because either they don't want to see them die, they don't want to cause them that pain. Sometimes people are just private, you know, And if you think about it, one of the things that Jackie Morgan from Natural Grace, they're a holistic funeral company that we work very closely with in our training, as you know, is with. And Jackie Morgan, who is their one of their holistic funeral directors and mortician, has this beautiful saying that I love and quote regularly, which is, as unique as we are in our life, we are in our death. And I think this, to me, is where doulaing and families, it's so important, because if you think about it, and this is where I think a lot of the medical and nursing staff are viewing a medical event happening that requires medical care, and they do. And I can't do my doulaing without great palliative care, and I deeply acknowledge doctors and nurses. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I can't do my job without them. But that every death is so unique, right? And that it's not just about what treatment they're getting. Some people need space to die. Some people need to be surrounded to die. Another situation I think about is a woman dying. Her sister was very close to her, had been caring for her for a long time. And they were like two little peas in a pod, right? So connected. And again, very close to the end, but kept staying. And, they were playing music that she loved, and her sister was there holding her and encouraging her to go, right? But really what it came down to in the end was maybe, and I encouraged the sister, maybe it's time to step back and let her have her process, and you be in the room. But instead of having music it's got lyrics that would give her something to attach to, perhaps what we need to do is play a beautiful music that's in that vein but doesn't have lyrics, that it's like, when you're just in that music, you can just sort of float, So, I just think, and sure enough, when she was able to sit by close, but let her now go into herself and have her process, because she's so attached to you. And then sure enough, fairly quickly after that, she was able to leave. So, I hope that gives you some insight into different things that can happen, and being responsible in the moment,
Yeah, definitely. I really like that. And like you say, it is so personal. Death is so personal. And I've heard so many stories, exactly what you're saying. They might wait for the family to arrive, or they might wait for the family just to pop out and make a cup of tea, and then they can slip away. So really interesting.
There's 75% of people who've come back from being in coma talk about that they know what happened, they know who was there, they can recount things that were said that they felt and experienced.
So I was with one of my people yesterday who he's in the late stages of life. And so we were out and about, but he's really unwell and, quite frail, struggling. Yes. And he said to me, I'm just really ready to go. I'd be quite happy just to pop off now. And we talked about that for a little while. And I know of another lady as well, and she's right at the end stages. She's really just alive, but no quality of life, not able to live fully, just really ready to go. Do you have any thoughts around why that might happen? If we've got so much control in the point of when we're actively dying, we can wait for the family to arrive or wait for them to go. Do you think we have any control into how long we live for before we get to those later moments?
Yeah, look, it's a really great question, Kirsty. And I think there's many different sort of aspects to it, I think. And the first thing I would say is the way I engage conversations like that is, I guess, to get into the conversation with them and ask them questions. So, yeah, I get it. You want to be gone. You're ready to go. So what do you think? What do you think you're here? Do you think there might be, if there was a purpose to you being here still, what might it be? Getting them to inquire into that. Is there a story to tell that you can pass on to your children or grandchildren or your community or whoever is in your world? that would be something? Or is there something you've learned that you could share to leave a legacy? You know, now I know Joan Halifax, she's a Buddhist Roshi, which means teacher. She's worked extensively on death row and the prisons. And, you know, I've been really inspired by her work. And I went to a funeral once, and it was a funeral of a very, very difficult death. And I won't say too much about the circumstances because it's recognizable. But what I can say is that there were people in so the death was of someone that was killed by the police, but that person was a criminal and had done something, but they were also someone's mother, and they were they were also someone's son, and they were also someone's brother and sister, and they were also someone's family. And then in the church there were also a whole bunch of this person's community, and a lot of them were ex-criminals, had been in jail. And that day taught me one of the biggest lessons, because I went there, I had judgment around what had happened, about what this person had done and the impacts left, you know, for a lot of other people. But on that day, there was someone who was going to read out a letter which was from an inmate who this person had shared a cell with in jail. And I got asked to read out that letter because that person couldn't read it out on the day. Didn't feel comfortable. So I'm reading out this letter from this young man who was the jailmate, cellmate of the person who was deceased. And the love and the honor and the respect that he had for this man, and the difference this man had made to him in his time of grey cloud, right, darkness, was remarkable. So it was like seeing another side. But then there were all of the people, or not all of them, a lot of the people in the gathering for this celebration of life were ex-criminals, and they were deeply impacted. They came and spoke, and they shared about the nature of this young person, and you've just taught me so much about how we can be so quick to judge, but that everyone, there's like the duality, you know, the night, the day, the good, the bad, the male, the female, the light, the dark. You know, we all have that, and sometimes one's bigger than the other, but that we're all worthy, you know, at our core nature, not our behaviours, but at our core nature. Yeah.
I love that you've talked about looking for that positive part, and I'm reminded of my 88-year-old lady who doesn't do a whole lot, is in bed most of the day and going, well, I'm ready to go.
Yes.
But actually, when you think, well, what have you got left to do? What impact can you have? And again, I was wondering, as you were talking about that, Helen, whether part of her purpose is to be there in that position for the people around her to have learning, to have experiences,
exactly right,
to fulfill their life purpose. And so there's so many parts of it. And that's what I love about these conversations is we just don't know. We don't know the bigger picture. We don't know how all these threads intertwine, but we do know that we're connected and that love is important. And I like that. I like looking for the positive. I feel like that's a really great thing, no matter what the situation.
It is important. And I really want to also put a clarifier in there too, that, you know, there's looking for the positive is important. And we really have to be also honouring of the pain that gets caused and the people that are impacted by that. And so it's not about making it okay at all. We're talking about behaviours, and we're talking about people that are deeply impacted. And I hesitate to use the word victims, because I have an issue with that word and what it connotates. But there are people that are profoundly, deeply, I guess, negatively impacted by people's actions and behaviours. And so I just want to honour that, and I don't want to be nicing it all over. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's just important to me to say that. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And they are two separate things. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about how you think that death it's become a clinical thing, that we've taken death out of the home into clinical environments. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think if you go back, 100 years plus, people took care of their dying and their dead at home, right? And that's how it was done. Everyone did that. There weren't such things as hospitals. There weren't such things as funeral directors. There were people who came and took away your dead bodies. Bring out your dead, right? There weren't aged care facilities. They didn't exist. So times changed, and I think also, I remember talking to my mum about it once a long time ago, and Mum said, well, also post-war, there was so much death, and then there was other wars in Vietnam and all that, and there was so much, done that she said, people were like wanting to put it all away. And that was just her experience, because she lost her beloved, fiance. Well, they hadn't bought the ring, but they were intended, as the word was back then, to marry, and he was in the Air Force and died. And so I think that's part of it. I said, I think it's modernization, and the thing that I think's happened is that intrinsically there's nothing wrong with that. We now have aged care facilities and hospitals and funeral directors, and therefore we have put death, if you like, almost away from us. It's now not in our homes as much. It's in other people's hands. It's like, as I think Jesse Williams from Groundswell said, we outsource death, right? We put it out. And intrinsically there's nothing wrong with that. However, it's had a cost that I don't think we ever considered, and I think we're going to pay for. Well, we are paying for now and we'll continue to pay for. And that is that we've lost our confidence and our competence to take care of our dying, our dead, and our grieving in our family environment or in our community environment. So it's become more invisible. I mean, I have people in my training, that are 40, 50, 60 years of age who've never been in the presence of a dead body, right? And, because, and if you think about it, I hear story after story after story of people well, my precious grandma, who I adored, died when I was 12, and she was just whisked away. No one told me what was happening. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, and I was sent off to these neighbours that I didn't even like. I had to stay there while all the family, everyone was crying, but no one told me what about. And then she was never talked about again. The trauma that causes, that we put it at arm's length. So I think, it's twofold, in my view, that it's because it's become hospitalised. And even today, like, what a lot of people think palliative care is. I often say that palliative care needs a publicity makeover. It's got such a bad rap. But palliative care is often seen as, oh, well, that's a medical thing that doctors and nurses do. But it isn't. It's partly that, yes. But palliative care, the word palliate actually means to cloak. So we cloak the signs and symptoms of the illness. We're looking at quality of life. We're looking at a person to help a person live with what the manifestation of their illness is. It's about having life have better quality, and it's designed for people and their families. And it involves medical, but also psychosocial, spiritual, emotional. So it's actually this huge thing, palliative care, a huge brushstroke of a way of approaching care. And so, but because we've brought it down to people, and I have people say to me, I don't want to have palliative care. And I'll go, oh, you don't? Tell me why. What's behind that thought? Well, my Uncle Jack, he went into palliative care and he died 2 days later. I don't want that. People think palliative care will kill you. It's about actually improving. And the research shows that the earlier you engage palliative care, the longer life you have, and with the better outcomes, right? But again, it's not only medical and nursing. That's critical and crucial. And most people at end of life actually need some support in that area. Maybe it's pain management or other type of management. But it's one aspect of this whole pie. It's one slice of the whole pie of end of life and what other supports and we can provide. Family, community can provide many,
Exactly. I think as we've taken death away from the home, and like you said, it became, I think you used the word absent. The grandmother died, they whisked her away, went to the funeral, never spoke about her again. It's made death a topic which we don't interact with, we don't experience it, we don't see it. It is just taken away and dealt with somewhere over here.
Well, yeah, I think it's become like a sort of frightening,
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think that has made it a fearful topic because I mean, I've got nothing to qualify this, but from the conversations I've had, it would seem that people are more afraid of death now than they were 100 years ago or, in older times when we had the front living room, you had the sitting room.
Exactly right, yeah.
Where you'd put people and sit with them. So,
yes.
Yeah, it seems like by not talking about it, by putting it over in the corner and ignoring it, that has actually raised a whole lot of fear.
Yeah, well, I think, sorry. Yeah, go on.
No, that's okay. Fear's one of the biggest things that's out there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, and here's the other part of that puzzle, which I think is really prevalent and something that I, talk about a lot because I think we've got to wake the hell up and get the point, right? And I think we've created a culture, particularly in the West, we've created a culture where it's life versus death.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we're anti-aging. Right? Billion dollar industry, anti-aging,
one of the biggest. Yeah.
Staying young, right? Then the whole thing about, we hold death at bay. Death is something to be denied. It's something to be pushed away. It's something to be avoided at all costs, right? Whereas, so it's life versus death. What if the reality, the reality actually is that death is a 10 out of 10 stat. We're all going there.
Yeah.
And that it is actually, what if we could embrace it as one of the chapters of a full life? Right? And all of the ancient traditions say that this one life is only one chapter in a whole bigger book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So I can't prove that, but I get it. It makes sense to me. And I think that's part of the problem, Kirsty, is that we live like it's life versus death, and it's just bloody not, Death is coming to us all, some sooner rather than later. And if we can start to go, well, okay, we plan for, you would have heard me say this before, we plan for our weddings, we plan for our retirement, we plan for our vacation, we plan when we have a baby, we plan, but we don't plan our death.
And then we get a shock when it happens, or it happens to someone around us. We're surprised.
And it's the only one thing that you can actually guarantee that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's like it just goes wing, like, hello, people. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really feeds into a vein for me, because that's where my heart, it just pulls on my heartstrings. I wish we would talk about it more. I wish we would plan. That's one of the foundations for all the work that I've been doing. And
exactly, yeah.
Just getting people to open up this conversation. I think it's one of the most important conversations. And what you say about, as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, what if death isn't the end? What if that, because we look at it as failure, we look at it as this terrible thing. That's like birth.
In the medical profession, it's seen as a failure. Yeah.
Well, yes. But what if in the being of life and all these transitions that we go through, death is like birth? It's a passageway into something else, which is what I personally believe. And therefore, should that not be a celebration that we're passing through? And I don't want to underestimate grief or say,
no,
okay, someone's died or passed, whatever word you want to use, let's celebrate.
Yeah.
It's not like that, because grief is very, very real. And I think we need to honor our grief. We need to really go through our grief.
If you're willing to embrace it, grief is an absolute gift of love.
Yep, it's such a big piece. So in no means am I saying let's celebrate when people die. It's let's look at potentially maybe it's not such a big ending. Maybe it's a transition, it's a doorway into something else.
Well, it's an ending for us, if you like.
Yeah, physically for us, because they're gone.
But maybe there's a whole nother universe for them, right? That's a possibility.
Exactly. And then that comes full circle around to when you were explaining about people who are seeing past loved ones on their deathbeds. They're saying, oh, Auntie so-and-so's there and they've died 10, 15 years earlier. This is very, very common, isn't it, where we see past loved ones, or, you know, there's other things that take place in those final hours, those final moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps that's just that veil, which is the mesh into this afterlife world.
100%. And, you know, there's a lot of research being done right now on what happens, you know, at the time of death as far as consciousness goes. And, you know, Dr. Michael Barbato is someone that, you know, I've done some study with and training with, and he's a great champion of preparing the way in our doulas. And he and other doctors here in Australia and now and also many around the world are doing this research into what actually happens in our consciousness at the time of death. And Michael even goes as far to say as that there is no such thing, in his view, there's no such thing as unconsciousness or coma, that rather in it there's actually a spectrum of consciousness starting at, you know, awake and aware right through to drowsy sleep, deep sleep, anesthetic, death, right? And that our consciousness, we have levels of consciousness in each of those states. And to give you an example of this, a woman, she's given me permission to share this story. Her name's Naja. Naja had an incident where she ended up in intensive care. She'd had some sort of brain, I'm not even quite sure what it was, some sort of virus, something that caused her collapse. And she was in intensive care. And I got a call because the doctors, she was in an induced coma. In other words, the doctors had medically brought on a coma. And they do that quite often if people have had an accident or something, to allow the brain time to sort of heal and to allow the doctors to, you know, apply treatment and antibiotics and things, whatever they need to do. So basically a machine is breathing for her. Without that machine, she would not have been living, right, because she's been placed in an induced coma. Anyway, long story short, I was asked to go and do some work with her, you know, in my Reiki and the other things that I do, because when they were reducing the medication, everything was supposedly healed and they were like reducing the medication. She should have woken up. She wasn't. And I went to visit her a number of times and, you know, was doing the things that I know to do. And that's, you know, part with acupressure points that stimulate consciousness and using oils that activate, you know, brain and energy and things, and doing Reiki and all sorts of different things. And in the end, I ended up talking to her and I said, I'm not sure if you know what's happening, but you're in the hospital, you're in intensive care, this has happened, that's happened. And the doctors are saying you should be coming back, but you're not. And I'm wondering if you understand what's actually happening right now. But I said, but you need to choose. If you're going to go, but if you're going to stay, you need to stay, you know, and your husband's worried and your babies are going, well, where's mummy coming back? And, you know, like that. And I did this 3 days running. And it was the third night after. I didn't have the conversation the first 2 days. The third day I had the conversation. And that night she came back. When I went to see her, not the next day, the day after, she was still in intensive care, but she was off the respirator. She'd woken up. I put my head around the curtain and I said, hey, Naja, you know, great to see you. Welcome back. And she had a very raspy voice from where she'd been intubated, and she had a stitch in her throat from where the machine had been removed. And she said, Helen, I can smell and taste the oils. I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. She said, and you told me off. I heard you. Right? Now she was out, like unconscious, but she heard. And so, you know, there's way more happening, Kirsty, than we know. And it's why I always encourage families, talk to your people, you know, encourage them, love them, thank them as they're in that final stage, reassure them, you know, just be with them because they can hear you. There's 75% of people who've come back from being in coma talk about that they know what happened, they know who was there, they can recount things that were said that they felt and experienced. So there's way more going on in terms of consciousness. And there's a lot of people now researching this around the world, and scientific, written up, proper research, so which I'm grateful for, because I 100% believe it. And I think you're right. We don't know. And I've got strong beliefs like you about what happens. But I don't necessarily even talk about them very much because I can't prove it. And I'm more interested to say to a person I'm working with, really, I've read lots of different things. There's lots of possibilities. But tell me, what do you think? I'd rather spend my time exploring with them. You don't know? Do you want to know? Do you want to go and do some research? We can do some research together and go find out, And so it's about exploring with people what they believe. And I think the reason there's so much fear at end of life is because people don't have a view of what's happening. Some people are lapsed in their, whatever tradition or religion or faith that they've been brought up in. So that can often be play on people. It's like, oh, I'm being very good, wonder if I'll get into trouble, because it's all that heaven and hell thing that got bandied around so much, So I think our past has a lot to do with it. And I that's why I say to people, it's how do we now today, what can we think about and talk about today and consider that it might be different to what we learnt. And what would and I talk to people about, what would you like it to be? What if you could create it? What if?
Yeah, I love
right?
that.
We create what we think, right?
Uh-huh.
So what if you could create it? What would it look like? Tell me that. And I get them in that creative space and looking at it. And that can be really comforting for people. I go, well, why isn't it? I said, I can't prove it's not that. Yeah. I said, I don't care what anyone out there says, they can't prove it.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, it's so interesting. You talked about how you've got some very strong beliefs. You don't talk about them much because nobody can prove anything. Are you happy to share any of those, or have there been any life-defining moments in the work that you've been doing where that moment has influenced your beliefs, where you've gone, I believe this because of that?
I've done a lot of study over the years of Buddhist, but also more sort of Eastern Indian traditions. I've done a lot of study of meditation, Vipassana, again, different traditions in that Eastern thing. And there's something there that just feels right to me. I remember I was raised in the Catholic tradition and I struggled with it. And I didn't know why. But I remember this day when we lived in the bush in Australia here, and we were 60 miles from the nearest town, 20 miles to the nearest house. We were quite remote.
Wow.
And we lived in the on a beautiful big river called the Murrumbidgee. And so we're lots of gums, amazing, mate. Like the last 3 miles near the river were like gums, And I remember this day there was a fire down in one area of the property. And I came home from school and Dad took me down there. And when I grew up, I was very remote, so I was very isolated. So the trees, the dogs, and the horses were my friends, right? So the trees, I used to hug them and talk to them and hang out in them and hang off them over the river, and they were my friends. I loved the trees. And so Dad takes me down to this area that's been burnt out. I lost it because, the trees, and even though that wasn't my precious area, they were still my trees. And I was devastated, like at this death. And this black and death and destruction, I couldn't speak. I was just absolutely. Dad was like, "What's happening?" Right? Anyway, fast forward a few months later, I come back from school again. Dad says, "I want to take you for a drive and show you something." So he wants to take me up there. I said, "No, I don't want to go there. No." And he said, "No." He said, "I promise you, it's different. I really, it's important. I think it's important you see this. I want you to trust me." I went, "Ooh, all right." So I went. And when I got up there, I started to cry all over again because there was all this green new growth and these trees had all this. I said, "Oh, my God, they've come back to life." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "That's how nature works." I get emotional thinking about it. That's how nature works. It cycles. That there's no beginning and there's no end. This is my dad, a Catholic, right? Not an Eastern master, that's what Eastern masters say. There's no beginning and no end. You know, my teacher who I study meditation with talks about that, that who we really are has never been born and can never die.
Oh, wow. That's a big
right?
one.
So go there.
Yeah.
So this thing, this body, this earth suit that we go around in, that gets born, yes, and this dies. But what enlivens it, what gives it life force, the enlightenment that it carries, right, is it basically, I remember saying one day, what about if you were so awake and so aware and so, expanded in your consciousness that you're walking along one day and your body dropped off and you didn't even notice. And I just love that, even as a possibility, Kirsty. Even as a possibility, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing too, as I had an experience where, again, in Michael Barbato's workshop I did some years ago now, he asked us to consider these questions, and one was, what are your hopes and fears around your own death? And what came out of my mouth surprised me, because I'd done my end of life planning. I mean, hello, I do this work, right? You can't do this work and not have your shit together around that. And well, you can, but probably not the best.
Don't do it.
He's asked, what are your hopes and fears around death? And I'm like, what came out of my mouth totally surprised me. I said, I hope I have a long-term illness and I don't die suddenly. And I'm like, I do? Why do I like that? I was really surprised, right? So, of course, it became a bit of a dialogue with myself about, well, what the hell's that about, right? What I got to see was that I was like, well, I hope I don't die suddenly, because there might be something I haven't done or I've left undone or I've left behind or I need to fix. Or I was like, whoa, okay, best we start writing that list, right? Have that be my bucket list, not the things I want to do, but what am I worried about? You know what one of the bloody things was, Kirsty, I love every time I talk about it, was this big bunch of plastic tubs. Plastic tubs that you store stuff in.
Yeah, like containers.
I've moved houses a number of times. I had like 18 of them. And I was like, well, I've got to clean out my plastic tubs. And I'm not that there was anything in there that shouldn't be found, but it was like, no, I have to clean up my plastic tubs. Anyway.
Yeah.
Needless to say, the plastic tubs are done, just so you know. But what it led me to was a really great inquiry that I love and I live in. Is like, what would it take for me to, the minute the death comes and taps me on my shoulder and says, come on, your turn, that I can go, yes, into that experience. I get goosebumps even saying that, rather than no, or I'm scared, or oh shit, I haven't done the Do you know what I'm saying? Where I can, that's another life experience, because it's part of my life. And that I may not, I've got, as I said, they're beliefs. I've got beliefs about what happens after this. I believe that I will absolutely, depending on where I'm at in my evolutionary process and my karmas and my dharmas and all of that, that I will, probably come back again if I have to. If I haven't quite achieved everything yet or whatever, I'll probably come back again and I'll keep going and keep going and keep going, A lot of the Eastern masters talk about that we live hundreds of thousands of lifetimes. Some other traditions talk about 4 or 5 or 6, who knows? I don't know. I suspect the first.
I suspect. Yeah. Oh, no, we can't prove anything, can we?
No, I know, because I hear people say, I don't want to come back again.
Yeah,
and
I hear that.
And they're people that are on a spiritual, studying spiritual path and tradition. And I go, well, that's probably going to buy you another one. Because, right? I mean, because that would be attachment, wouldn't it? And they always say it's about not being there. So we could talk about this for 65 hours. So that's it. I here's what I believe 100%, that there is way more than just this one life. And I remember saying to Dad when I was a kid, Dad, how can there only be one life? Because that's what we were taught, that, the world began when Jesus was born, and when you died, yes, you go on to something else. But there were traditions who believed that was it. This was it, like people who are practicing atheists. They believe that we're all just come from nothing, go back to nothing, it's nothing. And I go, no, and I have no issue with that. I've worked with people who are in that place, and it's totally cool. My point is that I remember saying to Dad, it just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up that we only get one go. Because if you think about it, there's so many countries we could live in. There's so many jobs we could have. There's so many types of bodies we could have. There's so many ways to die. Like, why would the great creation that this experience is, only give us one go? It just, to me, it just doesn't land. And, one of the things that really shifted my whole premise was I read a little book back, I was 21, I think. This is what started this whole thing. 2020, maybe it was, 2021. And it was called A Meditator's Diary, and it's a little penguin book, not very thick, and it's about a woman, her name's Jane Hamilton, something or other, and she spent 3 months in a Buddhist wat, which is like a temple, doing a 3-month silent meditation retreat. Wow. And so this little diary is like it's like a little diary. And I read that, and I was carrying it around. I took it to the loo with me. I could not put this thing down. I'd never read anything like it. But what she was talking about was just like mind blow for me. And after reading that book, it was like I started talking about these wisdoms in the Buddhist tradition, and stuff would start coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, who said that? I didn't know I knew that, or I didn't know I thought that. It was like something unlocked. It was like a key to something for me. And I started doing Vipassana meditation retreats way back then. And so I've done a lot of study in that. Now I study different traditions, more towards transcendent meditation. And, I'm big on chant and prayer and meditation and all those sort of, as my friends call my spooky things. I love a bit of good woo-woo la-la.
Oh,
but it's got to be tempered by we're here now.
Yes.
People often say, past lives. And I go, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, every one of my past lives is, if we've had them indeed, every one of them is here with me now.
Yeah.
So best I stay here now and work on this and be the best I can be here, because that's what I'm going to take forward. It's like, why digging around back there when I'm living it out right here in my relationships and my current. So that gives you a bit of what I believe.
Thank you,
Helen. I've told anyone in a long time.
that resonates for me as well, because if you're following the podcast, you'll know I talk a lot about the physical experience. We're here having our physical experience. We've got these bodies for a reason. Yes, I'm all about the spiritual stuff, the woo-woo, the spooky stuff. I can't remember what you called it. But
woo-woo la-la. Woo-woo la-la. That's a joke one. Woo-woo la-la. Yeah.
Woo-woo la-la. But we are having the woo-woo la-la while we are here having this physical in our bodies with our emotions and our feelings and our pain and our responses and everything for a reason. So yes, we've talked a lot about past lives, particularly in our VIP group. We've talked about past lives and how things can transfer over through lifetimes. But yeah, like you say, don't go looking for that stuff. But sometimes if it flows into this lifetime and it's an issue that needs resolving, that may be a reason to look at it. But yes, we're here in this lifetime right now.
Yeah.
So I love that.
And I believe it can be accessed right here,
Yeah, me too.
Transforming what's happened now. And, there's a lot of conversation now about intergenerational trauma and how we bring forward that trauma and how we could complete it, in this lifetime, which will free up the future generations. And I love that thought. And that to me is what this is all about. That's what, to me, healing is all about. And I don't know how many thousands of Reiki sessions I've done over 30, 5 years or something, thousands. And that's what I see healing is. You know, healing is, it's like a completion of something, you know. It's not an unpacking, digging around. That's why I ended up giving away my Chinese medicine and all my other modalities and becoming a dedicated Reiki practitioner, because it was miraculous what was happening for people, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I never knew what the healing was going to come forward for someone, because frankly, it's none of my business. But also, it's because it's about that evolutionary thing. What is it that needs to be resolved, the presence of which will create more liberation and freedom and well-being and health and awakening, you know? So that to me was where Reiki is that great tool. I use Reiki all the time with people that I'm working with at End of Life. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, plug in for Reiki because I love it so much.
I love it. That's great. Now, Helen, you've set up Preparing the Way, which is training up people as end-of-life doulas, the training I went through, which was absolutely life-changing for me, and I really hope for the people that I'm working with and the families.
Awesome, Kirsty. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about it. Do a little plug for Preparing the Way, because I send everybody your way.
Yeah, thank you. So Preparing the Way, we started back in 2000 and sort of late 2014, early 15. And it's dedicated at this point to end-of-life doula training. We have different layers of programs depending on what people do. We train in Australia and New Zealand, and all of our training's on Zoom right at the moment, given, you know, our current climate. And what we just launched yesterday, is the world's first nationally accredited certificate 4 in end-of-life doula services. And it's, I know. So it's massive. It's been 2 years, 6 years dream, 2 years solid work, and you know, massive. It's taken everything on every level, financially, everything. It's all in this, and we've just launched it. And you know, because here's the reality, Kirsty, that 80% of people die in hospitals and aged care facilities, and we want people where people are dying, and doulas, you know. These days, often you need a qualification or a piece of paper to get you into those more conventional care settings. So I was like, well, I'm going to stop at nothing to get this achieved. So that's what it's about. So we're about empowering people at End of Life. We're about empowering people. And some people want to become doulas to help one in their family. Some people want to become doulas to help in their community. Some people want to be more grassroots at home stuff. Some people want to work in the more mainstream conventional system. So that's what Preparing the Way is. We deliver end-of-life doula training. We also deliver end-of-life education. And we're really, really committed to transforming end of life on the planet. And we're doing that. We're actually achieving that. One by one. You actually
are. Yes, definitely. And I think that's why I resonate so strongly with what you're doing, because that's part of my passion as well. Yeah. Now, if you're listening and you're thinking, because I do get a few emails from listeners going, oh, I've thought about being a hospice worker, or I've thought about working with people end of life, but I don't know where to start. Send me an email. I'll connect you with Helen, or go direct to Helen at Preparing the Way. We're going to put all the links in the show notes. So just have a look down here in the show notes. Under this episode, you'll find everything there. I'm going to put a link to that book, because that sounded fabulous as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Helen, it has been so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Kirsty.
I've got one final question for you before we sum up. And that question would be, what do you think that death has taught you about how we can live?
I wrote a piece the other day, and my last line is that the world that I want to live in is not one that wants to push death away. That there is death in life. That's a reality. And there is life in death.
Yeah. That is absolutely fantastic. Helen Callanan, thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Kirsty. I've had a great time. Thank you. It's been awesome to talk with you. And if I could send anything out to all of your listeners is, you know, take a hold of the hand of the people close to you and talk to them. tell them your wishes, have these conversations. You just break through the fear and just do it anyway. I promise you, you won't regret it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help me to be able to get more episodes out into the world. There's also the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page. And if you wish to share your experience with me firsthand, you can always get in touch via Kirsty at letstalkneardeath.com.